November 1943, Empress Augusta Bay, Bougainville Island. The jungle swallowed sound in strange ways. Rain hissed through the canopy, insects screamed, but the crack of Japanese rifles cut through everything. 2 companies of Marines had been pinned along the perimeter for 72 hours. 11 men were dead, and the shooters remained invisible. The Japanese snipers had tied themselves into the upper reaches of breadfruit trees and nipa palms, wrapped in foliage, their bodies blackened with mud. They fired at intervals calculated to maximize terror and minimize exposure. 1 shot every 40 minutes, sometimes an hour, never predictable, never rushed. Each bullet found an American throat, an American skull, an American spine. The Marines called them spider shooters. The term had nothing to do with webs. It came from the way Japanese snipers positioned themselves in the treetops, legs splayed against the trunk and branches, bodies secured with rope. They could hold position for days. They had rice balls wrapped in bamboo leaves. They had canteens. They had patience measured in seasons, not hours. And they had optical equipment that American intelligence officers dismissed as inferior until the body count proved otherwise. Private First Class Warren Mitchell crouched behind a fallen mahogany, his back against the trunk, his knees pressed into mud that smelled like rot and copper. He was 23 years old. Before the war, he had worked in his father's hardware store in Indiana. Before the war, he had been a competitive shooter at the county fair, winning ribbons with a single-shot .22 rifle that his grandfather had given him when he was 12. Before the war, he thought he understood rifles. The war had taught him otherwise. Mitchell had arrived on Bougainville with the initial landing force on November 1st. The 3rd Marine Division came ashore at Cape Torquina under fire from Japanese positions that had been dug into coral and concealed in vegetation. A 75mm gun had torn into the landing craft, killing Marines before they could taste salt water. Sergeant Robert Owens had charged that gun position, rushing forward under covering fire from 4 riflemen, killing the Japanese crew before dying of his wounds. He earned the Medal of Honor for that act, posthumously. That word appeared in too many citations on Bougainville. The perimeter expanded quickly in those first days. American and New Zealand engineers began constructing the airfields that would allow bombers to strike Japanese positions further west. But the jungle did not cooperate with clean lines and organized defenses. The perimeter stretched over 20 kilometers, and the Japanese filtered through gaps that existed only at night, only in shadow, only in the spaces between exhausted sentries. If you find this history compelling, consider hitting that subscribe button. Now back to Bougainville. Mitchell had been assigned to perimeter security on the northern edge of the beachhead. His squad occupied a series of foxholes connected by shallow trenches that flooded when it rained, which was always. The mud reached their calves, the mosquitoes reached their blood, and the snipers reached everything else. The first death in Mitchell's squad happened on November 8th. Corporal Danny Alvarez stood to urinate at the edge of his foxhole. The bullet entered below his left ear and exited through his right temple. He was dead before his body completed its fall. No one heard the shot until the echo. No one saw the muzzle flash. The Marines scanned the trees for hours, searching for movement, searching for color, searching for anything that would betray a human form among the leaves. They found nothing. The second death happened the following morning. Private Jerome Washington was filling canteens from a captured Japanese water barrel. The bullet struck his throat. He made sounds that Mitchell still heard in his sleep, wet sounds, choking sounds, sounds that lasted too long, while Washington's hands pressed uselessly against the wound. The corpsman reached him in 11 seconds. It wasn't fast enough. By November 11th, 11 Marines were dead along the northern perimeter. Battalion Command had tried everything. They had called in artillery strikes on suspected sniper positions, blasting tree lines into splinters. The snipers moved. They had sent out patrol teams to locate and eliminate the shooters. 2 patrol members died. One returned with a Japanese bullet lodged against his spine. The snipers remained. The problem was optics. Mitchell understood this with the clarity that comes from watching friends die. Japanese snipers used Type 97 rifles fitted with 2.5x or 4x magnification scopes. The American response relied on M1 Garand rifles with iron sights, effective to perhaps 400 yards under ideal conditions. Bougainville offered no ideal conditions. The jungle reduced visibility to meters, not yards. The humidity fogged lenses. The rain distorted sound. And the Japanese had adapted their tactics to exploit every American limitation. The Marines had been issued M1 carbines following the Guadalcanal campaign. The little rifles weighed just under 6 pounds and measured only 35 inches in length. They were designed for officers and specialist troops, not frontline infantry. But the jungle demanded maneuverability, and the carbine delivered it. Marines carried them through swamps and up ridges, through elephant grass and across coral formations. The carbine became the soldier's pet. But the carbine had limitations. The .30 caliber round it fired was less powerful than the .30.06 used by the Garand. Accuracy degraded significantly beyond 200 yards. The rear sights were crude, forcing Marines to file them into V-notches for better target acquisition in dense vegetation. The carbine was perfect for close-quarters fighting. It was useless against snipers hiding 300 yards away in 80-foot trees. Mitchell spent the night of November 11th in his foxhole, listening to the jungle, thinking about geometry. The Japanese snipers operated at ranges between 200 and 400 yards. They fired from elevated positions, which improved their effective range and complicated return fire. American weapons were designed for open-terrain engagement. American tactics assumed that enemy positions could be located and suppressed. The jungle violated every assumption. He thought about his grandfather's .22 rifle. He thought about the county fair, where targets hung from poles at measured distances, where the air was still and the light was good, where shooting was a puzzle rather than survival. He thought about the Winchester catalog that had arrived at his father's hardware store every spring, glossy pages filled with hunting rifles and telescopic sights. And he thought about a photograph he had seen in Life magazine before deployment. A hunter in Wyoming posed with an elk, holding a rifle fitted with what the caption called a fence post scope. The term came from the scope's length and diameter, which made the rifle resemble a fence post when silhouetted against the sky. The scope was a Unertal 8x magnification designed for target shooting at ranges that made Japanese sniper distances seem intimate. By dawn on November 12th, Mitchell had a plan. The Marine Corps supply chain on Bougainville was a study in controlled chaos. Equipment arrived from ships anchored in Empress Augusta Bay, offloaded onto landing craft, transferred to shore, sorted through supply dumps, and distributed to units that filed requisition forms in triplicate. The system worked for standard items. It failed completely for anything unusual. Mitchell did not need standard items. He found Gunnery Sergeant Harold Pierce at the main supply dump, a coral clearing surrounded by crates and tarps and Marines who looked like they hadn't slept since San Diego. Pierce had been a machinist in civilian life. He had spent 20 years working on industrial equipment in a Pittsburgh factory. He had enlisted at 41, lied about his age, and ended up running logistics for the Northern Perimeter because he could fix anything and fabricate most things. Mitchell explained the problem: 11 dead, invisible snipers, inadequate weapons. Pierce listened without interrupting. When Mitchell finished, Pierce spat tobacco juice into the coral and nodded. "What do you need?" Mitchell described the fence post concept. Take an M1 carbine, strip it down. Extend the barrel for accuracy. Mount a telescopic sight with sufficient magnification to engage targets at 400 yards. create a weapon that could reach the Japanese snipers before they could reach anyone else. Pierce looked at Mitchell for a long moment. That's not standard modification. Standard's not working? Pierce spat again. Command won't approve it. Ordnance regulations prohibit field modification of issued weapons without authorization from... Command is 11 bodies behind, Mitchell said. They'll approve whatever stops the dying. The workshop was a corrugated metal shed that had been assembled from salvaged parts and Japanese materials captured during the initial advance. It smelled like oil and metal, and the particular staleness of enclosed spaces in tropical heat. Pierce had tools arranged on wooden benches, files, wrenches, drill bits, measuring instruments. He had a lathe that ran off a generator salvaged from a Japanese communications post. He had welding equipment designed for ship repair that had been repurposed for everything from fixing rifle stocks to fabricating replacement parts for broken vehicles. Mitchell spent 3 hours explaining what he needed. Pierce spent 3 hours explaining why it was impossible. The carbine barrel was too short for accurate long-range fire. The .30 carbine round lacked the ballistic coefficient necessary for stable flight beyond 250 yards. The receiver wasn't designed to accommodate a telescopic sight-mounting rail. The trigger mechanism was adequate for combat shooting, but too heavy for precision work. The stock geometry would require complete reconstruction to support a scope and allow proper cheek weld. Mitchell understood these problems. He had thought about them in his foxhole while rain dripped through the canopy and mosquitoes drew blood from his neck. He had solutions for each one. The barrel problem is easy, Mitchell said. There's a Japanese Type 99 in the captured weapons pile. Longer barrel, similar bore diameter. We adapt it. Pierce raised his eyebrows. Similar isn't same. You're talking about rechambering a barrel for a different cartridge, which requires precise machining that... We machine it precisely. The Japanese barrel is 7-point Miyamuram. The carbine fires 7.60 purm. That's nearly 0.2 of a millimeter difference in... Close enough for government work. Homage. Pierce laughed despite himself. It was the first time Mitchell had heard anyone laugh in days. They worked through the night. Pierce proved himself a master of improvisation, using techniques he had learned in 30 years of making machines do things they weren't designed to do. The Japanese barrel required extensive modification, crown work, throat adjustment, chamber reaming. The receiver needed a mounting rail welded to its top surface, which Pierce accomplished using steel salvaged from a damaged landing craft. The stock was rebuilt entirely, lengthened and reshaped to accommodate a cheek piece carved from mahogany. The scope came from an unexpected source. A Marine reconnaissance unit had captured Japanese equipment that included a German-made Zeiss optic, apparently supplied to Japan before the war. The scope was 4x magnification, not the 8x that Mitchell wanted, but superior to anything available in American inventory. Pierce mounted it using a system of rings and bases that he fabricated from aluminum stock intended for aircraft repairs. By dawn on November 13th, the rifle was complete. It looked like nothing the Marine Corps had ever issued. The barrel extended 18 inches beyond the original carbine length, wrapped in cloth to prevent glare. The scope sat high on the receiver, requiring the rebuilt stock to provide proper eye relief. The overall length was nearly 4 feet. The weight had doubled from the original carbine to nearly 12 pounds. Pierce held it at arm's length, examining his work with the critical eye of a craftsman. It looks like a fence post with a trigger. Mitchell took the rifle. Then that's what we call it. Move! Word of the fence post carbine spread through the northern perimeter with the speed that only mortal fear provides. Marines who had spent days watching friends die saw the strange weapon and understood immediately what it represented. Hope, possibility, a chance to fight back against enemies who had been untouchable. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, commanding officer of the battalion holding the northern perimeter, summoned Mitchell to his command post that afternoon. Morrison was a career Marine, Guadalcanal veteran, survivor of battles that had aged him decades in months. He looked at the fence post carbine without expression. "Private Mitchell, I understand you've been conducting unauthorized modification of government equipment." "Yes, sir." "I understand this modification violates 17 separate ordnance regulations and approximately 12 Marine Corps directives regarding weapon standardization." "Yes, sir." Morrison picked up the rifle, sighted through the scope, felt the balance. "I understand you believe this monstrosity can kill the snipers who have eliminated 11 of my Marines." Mitchell hesitated. "I believe it can reach them, sir. Killing requires me to do my part." Morrison set down the rifle. "You have 24 hours to prove it works, or face charges for destruction of government property. Dismissed." Mitchell found his target at Sussex off 17 on November 14th. The Japanese sniper had positioned himself in a breadfruit tree approximately 340 yards from the American perimeter. He was invisible to naked eyes, wrapped in foliage and shadow, his form indistinguishable from the 1,000 other shapes that comprised the jungle canopy. But through the 4X scope, Mitchell could see details: the cloth wrapped around the rifle barrel, the rope that secured the sniper to the trunk, the movement of a hand reaching for a canteen. Mitchell had set up in a fighting position, reinforced with sandbags and palm fronds. He had arrived before dawn, allowing his eyes to adjust to the light gradations that would reveal anomalies in the visual field. He had studied the tree lines for 2 hours, scanning methodically from left to right, looking not for human shapes but for irregularities in pattern. A branch that moved differently than others, a shadow that remained constant when wind shifted the foliage around it. The breadfruit tree had betrayed its occupant through an accumulation of small details: a slight depression in the leaf cover that suggested weight, a branch positioned at an angle that would provide stable support for a rifle, a color variation that might be fabric rather than bark. Mitchell confirmed the target through the scope. He adjusted for elevation, estimating range by reference to known distances along the perimeter. He adjusted for wind, reading the movement of vegetation between his position and the target. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate to the rhythm he had learned shooting at county fairs in Indiana, when the only thing at stake was a blue ribbon. He pressed the trigger. The modified barrel produced a sharper report than the standard carbine, the sound carrying across the perimeter and into the jungle. Through the scope, Mitchell watched the Japanese sniper jerk backward, the impact throwing his body against the ropes that held him to the tree. He watched the rifle fall, tumbling through branches, crashing through layers of foliage until it disappeared into the undergrowth. He watched the body sag in its harness, head dropping forward, arms hanging loose. The fence post carbine had drawn first blood. News of the kill reached Lieutenant Colonel Morrison within the hour. Marines along the perimeter had witnessed the shot, had seen the distant tree shudder as a body struck branches on its way down. Morrison arrived at Mitchell's position with a skepticism that faded when he examined the breadfruit tree through field glasses. "That's 300 yards minimum." 340 by my estimate, sir." Morrison lowered the glasses. "Your estimate is accepted. Effective immediately, you are reassigned from perimeter duty to sniper elimination. Find them, kill them, report to me daily." Mitchell spent the next 48 hours hunting. The Japanese snipers had established a pattern that Mitchell learned to read like text. They favored certain tree species, breadfruit for the broad platforms its branches provided, nipa palms for the concealment their fronds offered. They positioned themselves at heights between 60 and 90 feet, high enough to command sight lines over the American perimeter, but low enough to avoid the most violent wind movement in the upper canopy. They fired during specific windows: early morning when light angles created shadows that concealed muzzle flash, late afternoon when American attention was dulled by heat and exhaustion. Mitchell adapted his own approach to exploit Japanese patterns. He moved into position before the Japanese preferred shooting windows, establishing himself in concealment while his targets were still climbing into their roosts. He scanned systematically, covering each tree with the patience his grandfather had taught him, looking for the tells that betrayed human presence in natural environments. The second sniper died at 7:34 on November 14th. Mitchell found him in a banyan tree, 285 yards from the perimeter, positioned behind a screen of aerial roots that provided excellent concealment from ground observation. The scope revealed what naked eyes could not: the outline of a rifle barrel, the curve of a shoulder, the movement of a head-adjusting position. One shot, one kill. The third sniper died at 15:42 the same day. He had positioned himself lower than the others, perhaps 30 feet up, hidden in a tangle of vines that cascaded from an emergent tree. The position offered superior concealment, but inferior angles, forcing the sniper to expose himself when taking shots at the American perimeter. Mitchell waited for that exposure. The Japanese sniper raised his rifle to engage a Marine patrol returning from forward reconnaissance. Mitchell saw the movement through his scope. He fired before the Japanese sniper could complete his aim. The bullet struck center mass. By sunset on November 14th, Mitchell had eliminated 4 Japanese snipers. The perimeter that had lost 11 Marines in 6 days lost none in 1. The fourth kill happened at 18:17, in failing light that made scope work difficult but not impossible. The Japanese sniper had climbed into position just as darkness approached, apparently believing that American observation would be hampered by the transition from day to night. He was correct about the hampered observation. He was incorrect about its completeness. Mitchell caught the movement of the climb through peripheral vision, swung the fence post carbine to track, found the target settling into shooting position, and fired. Night brought respite. Japanese snipers did not operate in darkness. Their optical equipment, like most optical equipment of the era, required ambient light to function. Mitchell returned to the command post, reported his results, cleaned the rifle, and slept for 4 hours. It was more sleep than he had gotten in any single stretch since the landing. November 15th began at 04:12 with Mitchell moving into a new position, having calculated that the Japanese would adjust their deployment based on the previous day's losses. They would avoid the sectors where their snipers had died. They would seek positions farther from American lines, accepting reduced accuracy in exchange for increased survivability. Mitchell adjusted accordingly. He moved forward of the perimeter into the no-man's land between American and Japanese positions, finding concealment in a shell crater that offered sight lines to likely sniper positions in the deeper jungle. The risk was significant. He was now within range of Japanese ground patrols, exposed to the very snipers he hunted, but the mathematics of engagement required closing distance. The fifth kill came at 06:58. A Japanese sniper had established position in an emergent tree nearly 400 yards from the American perimeter, apparently believing that extreme range would provide protection. The distance was at the edge of the modified carbine's effective capability. Mitchell held high, accounting for bullet drop. He squeezed the trigger. He watched through the scope as the target slumped. The sixth and seventh kills happened within minutes of each other. 2 Japanese snipers had positioned themselves in adjacent trees, perhaps working as a team, perhaps simply exploiting the same favorable terrain. Mitchell engaged the first, cycled the bolt, swung to the second, and fired before the surviving sniper could react. Both bodies hung in their harnesses, dark shapes against the green of the canopy. Word spread beyond the perimeter. Other battalions learned of the Marine with the fence post Carbine, the private who had eliminated 7 Japanese snipers in less than 30 hours. Requests arrived at Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's command post. Could Mitchell be assigned to other sectors? Could the rifle be examined by ordnance specialists? Could the modification technique be documented for wider application? Morrison denied every request. Mitchell stays on my perimeter. until the sniper problem is solved. After that, we'll discuss documentation. The 8th kill happened at 14:23 on November 15th. The Japanese sniper had descended to ground level, abandoning the treetop positions that had become death traps. He had established himself in a concealed bunker, a spider hole covered with vegetation and coral fragments, invisible from direct observation. But the bunker required a firing port, and firing ports required geometry. Mitchell calculated angles from previous sniper fire, identified the sector where the shots must have originated, and began systematic observation of ground-level concealment positions. He found the firing port at 14:07, a darker shadow in a shadowed space, approximately 220 yards from his position. He watched for 16 minutes, waiting for movement, waiting for confirmation. At 14:23, a rifle barrel emerged from the shadow. Mitchell fired into the darkness behind it. The barrel withdrew. No further shots came from that position. The 9th kill nearly cost Mitchell his life. He had pushed forward again on the morning of November 16th, seeking engagement positions that would allow him to reach Japanese snipers who had retreated deeper into the jungle. He found concealment in a drainage ditch approximately 150 yards beyond the American perimeter, a position that offered excellent sight lines but minimal protection from ground-level threats. The Japanese had learned. They were hunting him now. The first indication was sound, a rustle of vegetation that didn't match wind patterns. Mitchell froze, scanning with peripheral vision rather than moving his head. The fence post carbine was pointed toward the jungle canopy, configured for long-range engagement. If the threat was close, if it was ground level, the rifle would be too slow to bring to bear. The Japanese soldier emerged from concealment 15 yards to Mitchell's left. He was moving low, rifle raised, eyes fixed on the drainage ditch where Mitchell lay. He had been sent specifically to eliminate the American sniper who was eliminating Japanese snipers. He had tracked Mitchell from the perimeter, followed his movements into no man's land, and approached with the patience of a predator closing on prey. Mitchell didn't think. He rolled, bringing the fence post carbine around in an arc that scraped the barrel against coral. The Japanese soldier fired. The bullet passed through the space Mitchell had occupied a heartbeat earlier. Mitchell fired from the hip, the fence post carbine roaring at a range where scope magnification was irrelevant. The round took the Japanese soldier in the chest, stopping his forward motion, dropping him into the vegetation. Mitchell lay still, listening, waiting for additional threats. None came. He crawled to the fallen soldier, confirmed the elimination, and noted the equipment. The Japanese had sent a sniper to kill the sniper killer. The equipment included a Type 99 rifle with 4x scope, nearly identical in capability to Mitchell's captured Zeiss. They had understood the threat. They had responded appropriately. They had failed. The 9th sniper, the one who had hunted the hunter, was the last Japanese sniper eliminated in the northern perimeter sector during the Bougainville campaign. Mitchell returned to American lines at 1847 on November 16th, 48 hours after his first kill. He reported to Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, presented a tally of 9 confirmed eliminations, and collapsed into sleep that lasted 14 hours. The fence post carbine had solved the sniper problem. The mathematics were undeniable. 11 Americans had died in 6 days before the weapon's deployment. 0 Americans died to sniper fire in the 48 hours after. But the rifle's impact extended beyond body counts. Japanese tactical doctrine in the Bougainville campaign relied heavily on sniper harassment as a psychological weapon. The constant threat of invisible death degraded American morale, disrupted operations, and consumed resources in counter-sniper efforts that achieved limited results. The fence post carbine had broken that equation. It had demonstrated that American improvisation could defeat Japanese preparation, that individual initiative could overcome institutional limitations. Morrison recommended Mitchell for the Silver Star. The citation noted extraordinary gallantry in action against an armed enemy, and specifically mentioned the field modification that had enabled Mitchell's effectiveness. Ordnance specialists examined the fence post Carbine and documented its construction, though they also noted that unauthorized modification of government equipment remained technically prohibited regardless of operational results. The documentation reached Marine Corps headquarters in December 1943. By January 1944, 3 additional fence post carbines had been constructed using Mitchell's design principles. By March 1944, the concept had evolved into a formal program examining field-modified weapons for specialized roles that standard equipment could not fulfill. Mitchell survived Bougainville. He survived the war. He returned to Indiana in 1946, took over his father's hardware store, and never spoke about what happened in the jungle until a local newspaper interviewed him in 1985 for a Veterans Day feature. "The rifle saved lives," he told the reporter. "That's what mattered. Command said it was impossible. The regulations said it was prohibited. The jungle said it was necessary. The jungle won." The fence post carbine itself disappeared into the fog of military logistics. Some accounts suggest it was retained as a prototype for study. Others claim it was destroyed during a 1944 ordnance review that eliminated non-standard equipment from Marine Corps inventory. Mitchell himself believed the rifle ended up in a crate somewhere, stored alongside other improvised weapons that had solved problems the military couldn't officially acknowledge. What remained was the principle: when standard approaches failed, when regulations became obstacles rather than guides, when lives depended on solutions that didn't exist in any manual, American soldiers found ways to adapt. They filed carbine sights into V-notches for better target acquisition. They constructed bandolier slings from machine gun ammunition belts. They welded Japanese barrels onto American receivers and mounted German scopes using aluminum meant for aircraft repairs. They built fence posts that killed snipers. The northern perimeter of the Bougainville beachhead eventually stabilized. American forces expanded their control, constructed the airfields that had justified the operation, and provided bases for strikes against Japanese positions throughout the South Pacific. The Marine Corps suffered 732 killed and 1,259 wounded during the campaign, casualties that might have been higher without innovations like the fence post carbine. The Japanese sniper problem on Bougainville was never completely solved by any single weapon or technique. It diminished as American forces adapted, as improved tactics reduced exposure, as the perimeter expanded beyond the range of harassment fire. But for 48 hours in November 1943, one Marine with one improvised rifle had changed the equation. 9 snipers, 48 hours, 1 fence post carbine. Private First Class Warren Mitchell proved that when conventional weapons failed, unconventional solutions could succeed. He proved that regulations meant for peacetime could be suspended in war. He proved that a hardware store clerk from Indiana could outshoot trained Japanese marksmen if he had the right tool for the job. The Marine Corps eventually standardized approaches that Mitchell had improvised. Sniper programs expanded. Optical equipment improved. Field modification, once prohibited, became accepted as a necessary adaptation to combat conditions. The fence post carbine contributed to a doctrine that saved lives throughout the Pacific War and in conflicts that followed. But the rifle itself, that strange assemblage of American ingenuity and captured Japanese equipment, existed only briefly. It was forbidden until it worked. It was impossible until it was necessary. It was one man's solution to a problem that official channels couldn't solve. They banned his fence post carbine. Then he dropped 9 Japanese snipers in 48 hours. After that, nobody mentioned bans again.